Okay. Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. And good morning. Before we get started, I'd like to ask our witnesses to indulge us for just a few minutes to take care of some committee business. It's my understanding that Mrs. Johnson, as a ranking member of the full committee, has some housekeeping that she wants the committee to undertake regarding the Democratic Caucus Subcommittee ranking member assignments and rosters. It'll just take a minute or so, and the proposed modified rosters in front of each of you. I now recognize ranking member to explain and make a motion regarding the change in the Democratic Caucus Subcommittee ranking member assignments and rosters. Ms. Johnson.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. We have a couple of subcommittee vacancies to fill on the Democratic side, and pursuant to direction from the Democratic Caucus of the committee, I move that the following subcommittee assignments be made. Mr. Costello of Illinois to serve as ranking member of the subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, and that Ms. Bonamici of Oregon to serve on the subcommittee of Research and Science Education and Technology and Innovation. Motion.
Without objection, it's so ordered. And now I ask unanimous consent that the committee adopt the revised roster in front of them, reflecting these appointments as outlined by ranking member Johnson. And hearing no objection, the revised roster is adopted. Amen. Now, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's hearing entitled Securing the Promise of the International Space Station, Challenges and Opportunities. And in front of all the members are packets containing the written testimony, biography, and truth and testimony disclosure of today's witnesses. I recognize myself now for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I want to welcome everyone to today's hearing, and once again thank our witnesses for their time and their preparation and for sharing their experience and wisdom on the important topic of the International Space Station. The title of our hearing describes what we hope NASA can accomplish, and that's, quote, securing the promise of the International Space Station, unquote. The ISS is an extraordinary engineering achievement, and it's a remarkably successful international collaboration that presents us an unprecedented opportunity to accomplish the beneficial scientific research. I'd like to see the International Space Station live up to its promise and potential. I'd like to see it enable scientists and researchers to do innovative research, the kind of life-saving biomedical research that can only be done in space. Fulfilling the promise of the International Space Station would not only serve humanity, it would also strengthen America's leadership in science, technology, and education. I'm often painfully reminded that NASA will rely on our Russian partners for crew transportation to the International Station for the next several years. However, for the purposes of today's hearing, we're not focusing on crew. Fortunately, there are a number of options for delivering the supplies and equipment necessary to conduct the research and utilize the International Space Station. Our international partners contribute 3 different launch systems that are vital for maintaining and utilizing the International Space Station. There are 2 domestic commercial cargo capabilities that will be tested for later this year. In fact, the most recent European automated transfer vehicle, ATV, was launched Friday and should dock to the space station sometime around 6:30 p.m. today, this very day. We're reliant on the Russian progress, the European automated transfer vehicle, and the Japanese H-2 transfer vehicle. But NASA does not have agreements with the European Space Agency to supply more automated transfer vehicles after 2014, or with the Japanese Space Agency to supply H-2 transfer vehicles after 2016. Now that NASA has finished International Space Station construction, I hope the credible potential of the space station is not squandered because research funding is shortchanged, or because of poor coordination managing the U.S. National Lab, or because of reductions in launch capacity to support it, or because NASA just can't get the job done. The president canceled Constellation, running a line through it because of So he said someone else's failure to act and he's become pretty adept at naming mistakes after other people other than himself. Sometimes he needs to look in the mirror and tell us why we're losing the pipeline and why we're going to get $5 gasoline. I also want to reiterate again that the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 directed that the Space Launch System and the Orion crew capsule be designed to provide a backup capability for access to the space station. After spending tens of billions of dollars to build the space station, Congress wanted to ensure that a national capability to access it was not jeopardized by over-reliance on untested commercial propositions. Supplying and utilizing the International Space Station is simply too important to be left to others. Yet NASA is pacing the development of Space Launch System and the Orion to be operational around 2021. Which could occur after the International Space Station's requirement. That's risky and borders on being outrageous. America's continued leadership in space and our national security depend in large part on developing and maintaining this critical capability. I can't stress enough the importance of acceleration of this launch system to ensure that we have an alternative method to transport people and cargo to the International Space Station as to launch future missions beyond low orbit, Earth orbit. I look forward to today's hearing. I now recognize my good friend from Texas, Ranking Member Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. I want to join Chairman Hall in welcoming all of our witnesses to today's hearing. And in addition, I'd like to express my appreciation in particular to one of the witnesses, Lieutenant General Thomas Stafford, for his decades of service to this country and his continuing effort to strengthen and promote the nation's civil and military aerospace capabilities. As this committee attempts to better understand the needs of our civil space program in these times of fiscal pressures, it is important to take a close look at one of the most important elements of the nation's human space flight program, namely the International Space Station. While the road to its completion has been a long one with many twists and turns along the way, the space station stands as one of the engineering marvels of the modern age and a testament to American ingenuity and perseverance. There's a lot one could say about the International Space Station, but I think the citation that accompanied the award of the ISS team of 2009, Collier Trophy, one of the aerospace profession's premier awards, sums up what has been accomplished, and that is the design, development, and assembly in space of the world's largest spacecraft, and orbiting laboratory promising new discoveries for mankind, and setting new standards for international cooperation in space. I would go further and also note that it is an accomplishment that has had great inspirational value for our young people, as evidenced by the intense interest of our students in taking to the orbiting astronauts and in developing science projects that might fly on the station. However, while we can talk about the promise offered by ISS in enabling future space exploration as well as carrying out basic and applied research that can benefit life here on Earth, its success in fulfilling that promise is not assured. We will only realize its promise if NASA and Congress ensure that the necessary steps are taken to make the ISS a productive research facility and technology test bed, and that is what we need to address at today's hearing. I understand the importance of trying to maintain uninterrupted access to ISS, and I know that we will hear testimony today on some of the challenges in doing so. However, we should not forget that the purpose of cargo and crew transportation systems is to support the utilization of the space station, not as ends within themselves. The reality is that the ISS is perishable commodity, and the future is really now in terms of utilizing this unique facility. While some may hope to extend its agreed-upon service life past 2020, we need to make sure that the 8 years that remain till the current end of the space station program are used effectively to answer the research and engineering questions that only can be answered by them. In short, we need clear, prioritized, and integrated utilization plans from NASA, and we need to be assured that these plans are being carried out, both by NASA and the Independent International Space Station Research Management Association, CASAS, that was set up for that purpose. The former director of CASAS raised a number of serious concerns in her recent resignation letter, and this committee will need to better understand what the situation is, given the important role in the International Space Station utilization. As a result, Mr. Chairman, I hope that this committee will convene another hearing before this session of Congress is over to examine all of the issues faced by the research community in trying to utilize the space station, as well as carrying out related ground-based research and development. We need to hear from the representatives of that community in addition to the testimony we will get from our distinguished panel testifying for us today. Before I close, I'd just like to make one more point. Namely, if we want to ensure that the space station carries out the needed research and technology activities in a timely and productive fashion, we have to be willing to make the needed investments. The research budget is stagnating, and the agency's life and microgravity research budget has been cut deeply over the past decade. That does not seem to me to be the formula to success. I am afraid that we get dumb from the continued chipping away, get numb, probably dumb too, chipping away of NASA's accounts by both Congress and the administrations. However, those continued cuts have had a negative impact on NASA's ability to carry out its missions that we should not ignore. And in spite of those negative impacts, the budget resolution that we will be voting on later this week would make additional cuts to the account that funds NASA and other R&D agencies. I hope that this Congress thinks twice before we embrace such cuts to an agency that is so important as NASA. In closing, I again want to welcome our witnesses and look forward to the testimony, and I yield back the balance of time that I don't have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. William H. Gerstenmaier, Associate Administrator of the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. As a supporter of human spaceflight, I'm very grateful to Mr. Gerstenmaier's dedication and longtime service to the nation. Mr. Gerstenmaier began his career with NASA in 1977 and has steadily advanced in the ranks. Over the past 20 years, he's been instrumental in the successful management of NASA's human space exploration programs. And I welcome Mr. Gerstenmaier. Welcome very much. And our second witness is Mrs. Cristina Chaplain, the Director of Acquisition and Sourcing Management for the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Ms. Chaplain has degrees from Boston University and from Columbia University and has been with GAO for over 20 years. She's conducted a number of assessments of NASA's major acquisition programs, including the recent review on utilization and sustainment of the International Space Station. Ms. Chaplain, we thank you and your staff at GAO for your service and look forward to your testimony today. As impressive as our first two witnesses are, I have saved what my speechwriter wrote here is for the best for the last. I'll let y'all make that decision. As bad as judging a baby contest. I don't know better than that. Our third and final witness is retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General Thomas P. Stafford, one of the most unusual men I know and one of the dearest friends I have. He's chairman of the International Space Station Advisory Committee. Tom's many accomplishments are legendary, and his distinguished service was acknowledged again when we recently awarded the prestigious 2011 Wright Brothers Memorial Trophy for his, quote, pioneering achievements that have led the way to the moon, to greater international cooperation in space, and to a safer America. And just one person per year gets that recognition. General Stafford has played instrumental roles in many of America's successful successes in space, from the Gemini Rendezvous and Apollo 10 missions with my other good friends, Gene Cernan, to the Apollo Soyuz mission in 1975 that laid the groundwork of trust and mutual respect among former adversaries that has been so critical to the success of today's International Space Station. Tom, thank you for your service to America and for testifying before us today. And as our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes, after which members of the committee will have the 5 minutes to ask their questions. We won't hold you to the 5 minutes. You're too valuable to us, and your time's too valuable. You took your time to get ready to come here, and to give us this testimony, so we'd be very lax on that. So I recognize our first witness, Mr. William Gerstenmaier of NASA.
Thank you. As you've already stated, the ISS represents an unparalleled capability for human space-based research that cannot be pursued on Earth, as well as a platform for the development and exploration technologies. The ISS is the most sophisticated space research facility ever built. It contains state-of-the-art research laboratories from Russia, Europe, Japan, and the United States. It has amazing robotic capabilities from Canada. The facilities for research include a combustion rack, a fluid facility rack to investigate low-gravity fluid motion, external payload attach capabilities for Earth and deep space viewing, a window observation facility, among many other unique facilities. ISS is truly a model for engineering development and international collaboration. This facility was not easy to construct and faced huge challenges during its development. Approximately 37 shuttle flights and approximately 1,000 hours of spacewalks, or 162 EVAs, went into its construction. Every shuttle flight had to occur precisely as scripted. The teams had to deal with loss of Columbia in mid-assembly and numerous in-flight challenges, such as loss of the wrist joint on the Canadian arm early in assembly, loss of all onboard computers on board the space station, and a tear in the solar array blanket. The budget challenges were also huge. However, through it all, the amazing ISS team constructed this wonderful facility that we have on orbit today. The team showed an unbelievable ability to deal with unexpected problems and keep working together to complete construction. They did this with behind-the-scenes detailed planning. The teams worked to keep open the option for extra shuttle flights beyond the original plan manifest. This work gave decision-makers options later to add these flights. In space operations, knowing when to make decisions is often as important as the decision itself. We are now facing a transition in ISS. We no longer need to focus on assembly, but we need to turn this dedicated team to using this amazing facility in space. The ingenuity, drive, and focus will now be applied to using the ISS for the benefit of all humankind. Through the conclusion of ISS Expedition 28 in October of 2011, approximately 1,250 research investigations were performed that involved 1,309 principal investigators from 63 countries around the world. Of these, U.S. principal investigators under NASA sponsorship conducted 475 investigations, 38% of that total. Expeditions 29 to 32, which covers the period from October of last year, 2011, to September of 2012, will include 259 investigations. In other words, approximately 20% as many investigations were performed in these two post-assembly expeditions as had been achieved in the prior 28 expeditions combined. We are starting to begin serious use of the International Space Station. The ISS teams, as well as the research community, need to be ready for this next phase. However, this utilization will not be easy. There will be startup transients with commercial cargo. The teams have planned ahead with ATV, HTV, and STS-135. We will have about a year for the commercial providers to come online. Nothing in space is ever easy. The teams have the cargo shipped to Japan for the HTV launch this summer. The cargo for the C2 Plus mission is ready at KSC for launch on April 30th. The ATV will hopefully dock to the ISS tonight with critical supplies and research equipment. The teams have solid plans for the next year. We've always been dependent upon the Russians for crew rescue, but now we have a single method for crew transportation. This is a tremendous responsibility for the Russians. We are working to bring commercial crew online as soon as possible. This utilization phase will not be easy for the International Space Station team, but however, based on their performance in assembly, this team, when now focused on research and utilization, will accomplish amazing things. They will build off of the techniques learned during assembly and place the necessary international agreements for cargo in place at the right time. The research community will also need to be prepared for this new phase. The priority will be on research and utilization and not on assembly and maintenance. ISS will bring tangible and intangible benefits to humankind. The ISS will provide a facility for the human spaceflight team to prepare for voyages beyond low Earth orbit. ISS can be an economic engine and allow companies to use the unique properties of space-based research for competitive advantage. The International Space Station team will enable productive use of this amazing facility and will grow from the challenges ahead. ISS will be a bridge to the future. The teams are prepared. My written testimony expands on these thoughts and adds additional detail. I thank this committee for its support and the chance to respond to your questions.
And I thank you. And now recognize Mrs. Chaplain of the GAO to present her testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting us to talk about the International Space Station and the challenges associated with maximizing its very unique capabilities. Our work touches on a range of challenges facing the space station, and I'll kind of go over the major categories of those challenges and what we've said in recent years. The first area is whether ISS can safely operate for years to come. As you know, we recently reported that NASA is doing a very credible job in assessing the structural health and safety of the International Space Station, and that this is no easy task given the uniqueness of the station and the limitations to making these assessments. They are still in the process of conducting structural assessments, however, and there may be issues that get pointed out in these assessments in the next few years that need mitigation that could affect things like cargo flights in the future. The second area we've looked at in recent years is the utilization of the station after its construction. When we did so, we compared the ISS to some national labs. We knew there was no direct analog to the ISS, but we looked to see what comparisons were relevant to how the space station and its research was managed. We recommended that there be a central management organization established to represent users of the ISS, oversee selections of research, conduct peer reviews, and ensure research is not duplicative. Other labs have used such an approach, and the National Research Council had recommended something similar. NASA is in the early stages of implementing this recommendation, and its effectiveness remains to be seen. The third area we've looked at in recent years is the development of commercial vehicles under both the COTS program and now the Crew program. For COTS, we found that NASA had established reasonable controls for their Space Act agreements, and they tailored them when appropriate. For the Crew acquisition strategy, we recommended that NASA rethink its strategy in light of receiving about half the funding requested. NASA has restructured its strategy. We have not evaluated that revised effort. But throughout all this work in following the commercial crew development and commercial cargo development, we have recognized that these efforts are inherently risky. And in the latest report, we did stress optimistic schedules in the commercial crew providers. Because of this, we have always emphasized the importance of following disciplined practices and knowledge-based practices for these efforts. These include things like not moving programs forward with a lot of unknowns about costs, requirements, and technology. As the commercial efforts are entering their most difficult phases of development, it's more important that these practices be adhered to. That concludes my statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Both were under 5 minutes. That's unusual. Disciplined. General, recognize you, sir. Turn your mic on, General. Not that I could order a general around or anything.
Have to read the order.
JG in the Navy wouldn't have much to say in your presence, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Minority Member Johnson and distinguished members of the committee. Again, it's a pleasure to be here and testify before you and express my views and concerns of my committee at the hearing. I will answer the questions provided in your letter of invitation, Mr. Chairman, from the standpoint of expertise as a former astronaut, former Deputy Chief of Staff for Research, Development, and Acquisition, and serving in many committees and chairman of those committees, both for the DoD and NASA over a period of years. And I have submitted a written statement for the record, and so in the essence of time, I will go right away to the questions. And question number one, are NASA's current plans adequate to ensure the requirements for the ISS maintenance, growth, and crew supplies and expendables? B, NASA scientific research utilization, national laboratory growth and utilization, and other contingency maintenance, can they be met through the year 2020? In response to your first question, for the near term, NASA's current plans are adequate to ensure that requirements for the ISS maintenance, growth, crew supply, and expendables, and the scientific research and the national lab utilization contingency maintenance can be met for the immediate future for 1 to 2 years. This is in a large part thanks to the supply of STS-134 and 135. And I want to acknowledge Mr. Gerstenmaier's leadership in pushing to have those last 2 shuttle missions launched and provide those supplies. Without those 2 shuttle missions, right now we'd be in a serious situation and probably be considering how we would decrew the space station to a certain number of people. So, to Mr. Gerstenmaier, the country owes you a vote of thanks for that, sir. Beyond this time frame, beyond the mid part of 2013, NASA becomes increasingly dependent on its projected flow of sparing and resupply needs, and on the planned fleet of cargo vehicles, which includes the ATV, the HTV, the Progress, and the commercial resupply services. In joint assessment with the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, headed by Admiral Joe Dyer, my ISS Advisory Committee concluded that the commercial vehicle launch schedule was overly optimistic, and we have not received sufficient data to conclude with confidence that the schedule could be met. This was a unanimous conclusion of both groups. Both commercial contractors, Orbital Science Corporation and Space Exploration Corporation, continue to experience significant delays in their development, testing, and their launch dates. With the present schedule beyond 2016, ISS resupply is almost totally dependent upon these CRS vehicles. However, I did notice that there were now proposed some HTV flights out there which will help. And recently NASA has updated and revised the launch manifest, making the schedule more realistic, but this still may have some potential optimistic assumptions. In real-time updates, the use of consumable and spares requirements are fed into the schedule. I think it is significant that the NASA has been conservative in their requirements and their forecasts for spares and the orbital replacement units. These have gone longer than forecast, and this gives us some pad that it can take some of the delays of the commercial resupply services. And with that, I'll stand by to answer questions from the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, General, and I thank all of you for your testimony. I remind the members that the rules limit questions to 5 minutes, and the chair will, at this point, open the round of questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm concerned about dates that have been assigned back through the years to the launch of, I guess, the initial date proposed flight of the second rocket, or Demo 2. I go with the first date I see is June 2009, with initial proposal when the Commercial Orbital Transportation Service, or COTS, contract was signed, I think, in 2006 and gave us 3 years. It started in 2009, and there's been just time after time after time after time there. It goes down to where now we're promised a date, April of 2012, and that schedule was changed in February, I think. This is April, and I don't know what to think, or I guess I just go to asking questions for it. Mr. Gerstenmaier, We spent 2 decades and tens of billions of dollars to build the International Space Station. Now, and with our international friends and people that trusted us. Now that it's finished, I hope NASA doesn't squander the incredible potential for life-saving research and other important science, because President Obama canceled the shuttle's replacement. I'm beyond frustration to know that our space station program is now dependent on the launch system of other countries to do the job that NASA ought to be doing. Congress has been pretty clear that NASA is not to rely totally on these commercial proposals, and I hear excuses and delay after delay for the supposedly simple act of delivering cargo to the space station. Mr. Gerstenmaier, NASA spent $1.6 billion on this effort so far, and the nation doesn't have very much to show for it. What does NASA get back when the companies continue to delay, and what's the penalty when they don't perform? What do you need? And if they have a successful test flight, can they repeat it as often and as sure as required to meet the demands of the space station? I guess that's my question to you, sir.
Okay.
And is there any penalty if they don't meet it?
Yes, sir. If they when they miss scheduled delays, they owe us an equitable adjustment under the contract. This is under the contract phase for cargo delivery. So if they miss a launch date, they owe us either some financial consideration or additional analysis.
What kind of financial consideration?
The things we've been able to do is we wanted to add more refrigerator freezer capability to their vehicles. We didn't have those in the initial contracts. That allows us to carry refrigerated samples to space station and also return them. That wasn't in the original contract, so for one of the delays, we got as part of the compensation for that a redesign and new equipment to be added into their capsule to carry these precious biological cargo to station and return them. So for every slip that occurs beyond a 1-month period, we get some benefit back to us, and we have to show how that provides equitable benefit to us equal to the amount of slip that it's caused us. And to your first point, they've spent quite a bit of time developing their launch pads. Our launch pads are now fully up and operational. Wallops still needs a little bit more work to get that done. That was done by the state of Virginia, but Orbital will use that facility. The SpaceX launch pad was built by them. That was part of their investment that you discussed.
Is that launch pad finished? Is it?
The one in Florida
usable?
is finished and ready. They've already flown one demonstration flight off of that launch pad, or several. One for us, and then one is another use. And then they have this next flight that's getting ready to launch off the pad, but it's fully operational. They just did a wet dress several months ago, and they're ready to go do the launch at the end of April. In the case of Orbital, the launch pad in Wallops is still behind schedule a little bit. That launch pad is being built by the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. They're providing that to the Orbital Corporation to launch off of. They still have some more activation and work to do at the launch pad, and that's what's holding up the cargo flights from Orbital. But they got started a little bit later in cargo delivery than the SpaceX team.
All right. I think the people that you're dealing with have delivered before, have deep pockets, ought to be able to produce. What do you need? What do you need from Congress or anything to stop the delays, or what do we need? Of course, we need more recognition of the needs of NASA rather than limiting us to less than 1% of the budget. We've asked the last 3 presidents for those and not received them. So I guess that has to be in part of your answer for our inability to keep the dates that have been set. I'll ask General Stafford, from your experience, what are some of the problems that are causing these delays, and how can the government ensure that they get performance? Use your microphone, General.
We go again.
Don't let that happen anymore.
Right. Got to read the dash one, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, from my experience as the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Research, Development, and Acquisition, and at that time I had acquisition, my budget in today's day is far more than a total NASA budget. And under that, you have really categories of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to be sure that to end up in the good, you need good, experienced program managers, people that had experience. You need insight and you need direction on how they do it. You have to look out for unrealistic, low-ball bids and unrealistic schedule by contractors and also by the government to lay on unrealistic requirements that do, in other words, they request technology that is not going to come on time. And as I brought out at the Wright Brothers Memorial Trophy Dinner, probably the record was set when I started the 117A. It was completely secret. It was very black, as they say, but we flew that airplane in less than 2 years and 8 months and was operational a little over 3 years, which is a modern record. And we pushed and we had insight to it. It met all the FARs. We did bypass Air Force regulations, but it met all the FARs, and so we knew exactly where we were. We had the insight to it. I don't know that we have the insight. I've not been involved with the management on these delays. It's been, my committee looks at the safety and the operational part of it. When you go down to say the good, the bad, the ugly, you review what's happened in the past, just from reading in open literature, like the turbo pump on the Space Shuttle main engine. It was bid in low at $150, $160 million. It ended up 10 years later about $1.2 or $1.3 billion. And the same way with the Webb telescope this committee knows about, which I've read in open literature. It was way underbid and probably the technology was not there. So you have to have good program managers and you have to have good program structures. Now, the way these programs are structured, as I have observed from the outside, I've not been involved with the management, under these Space Act agreements, which is other transactional authority, I don't know that it can really be have the insight and the management that you would have. You have a good program manager. And we had some of the best in Apollo with General Sam Phillips and Dr. Von Braun, probably some of the best, but they were right there on top of things.
We've gone over my time. I thank you. Others will have other questions, I think. Now I recognize Mrs. Johnson for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Fair is fair.
Mr. Gerstenmaier, we're all aware that the first few years in the International Space Station was actually spent assembling it and long before we could begin the research. But once the research was initiated and is ongoing, where is the focus now in the research?
ISS is a very diverse research facility. There's a alpha magnetic spectrometer that's on the outside of Space Station that actually looks for antimatter and dark matter from the universe, looking potentially how the universe was formed. There's also some Earth observation equipment on board. The HICO RAIDS instrument is a hyperspectral instrument that's looking at the ocean, looking at waves. There's some experiments being done now on combustion on board Space Station. We recently did some things looking at combustion stability in space. The advantage of looking at it in space is without gravity, the researchers can actually model the phenomena. So then when they look at more efficient gas turbine engines or more efficient automobile engines, they can take the knowledge that they gained on how the combustion actually works in low gravity, apply that here to the Earth. There's a lot of medical investigations going on aboard Space Station that deal with activities that can help us here on the Earth, things that help the elderly with bone loss, stability issues that astronauts face can also be investigated on Space Station. So it's a wide variety of research. There's probably 5 to 6 or so investigations every day being done uniquely on board the Space Station each and every day as we're in this next phase.
What do you think that will bring the breakthrough between now and 2020?
Again, I think the advantage of the space station is the fact that the crews have a long period of time to work on the investigations. In other words, they're not scripted that they have to complete an investigation immediately in a certain amount of time. They can do research much like we would do on a research lab here on the Earth. So if the astronauts see a unique phenomena that occurs in space that the researchers didn't expect to see, they have time to now investigate that research, and they may discover new phenomena or new things that never really existed. You know, we're learning a lot about how biological samples behave in space, how bacteria become stronger, how viruses become stronger. We can use that information to essentially build vaccines potentially for us here on the Earth. So I think the advantage of Space Station is the uniqueness of being able to take time to really do research and be creative in the way you do research and not be on a structured timeline that limits the amount of knowledge that you can gain.
Thank you. But there is a kind of a timeline that we are working against. And I have some real concern in the vaccines as well as viruses. Do you feel you're closer to any kind of breakthroughs?
We've done research on salmonella, and we've been able to develop essentially a strain of salmonella that's strong enough to cause the immune system to react, but not strong enough to give you the disease. So that's essentially a vaccine. That's about ready to go into FDA trials. There's been a lot of work working with the FDA to get it into trials, but we were able to use a small organism to get through the first phases of the FDA process, and then potentially it could go into FDA trials fairly soon. So the unique property that occurs with salmonella vaccine occurs with viruses and other things as well, so we could potentially explore developing new vaccines for viruses and other things as well on board Space Station. So it gives a whole new research avenue for companies and pharmaceutical companies to pursue in space.
Thank you. Ms. Chaplain, how can Congress determine whether NASA is on track to meet the objectives by 2020?
Major projects at NASA regularly report data to the committees on cost, schedule, performance, and status. These projects, I don't believe, are among those, and that's one key way you could be asking for data to follow progress in addition to these hearings. That data comes in semi-yearly cycles and yearly cycles, so it might not be as timely as needed. We have ourselves an ongoing assessment of all major projects within NASA, and we do plan to include these efforts next year to help the Congress have more insight and oversight as well.
Feeling the pressure of 2020 approaching, does that add anxiety or add any more effort to reaching some conclusions, or how do you internalize that date for research or time?
In terms of overseeing the commercial development efforts, or in terms of research for the station? We have not revisited our previous work in terms of assessing how the station is being used for research. We made a recommendation when we did our review that they establish an organization to manage the research and prioritize it and ensure it's not duplicative. That's just getting underway, so the next year or so is really going to be critical to see how effective that mechanism is, and is it going to be the best to optimize the space station's research.
Mm-hmm. With the, and this could be unfair, but with the direction of this administration and where it appears to be headed with less and less and less and less financial support, does that affect performance or direction or planning?
It could possibly. I've seen in several agency budgets that money for S&T types of activities, research activities, are being cut, and it could affect plans that some agencies have had to use the ISS for their own research activities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. And the chair now recognizes a gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Palazzo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gerstenmaier, according to the GAO's testimony in 2011, NASA anticipated 56 flights to the ISS between 2012 and 2020, and would likely be at risk of a shortfall to cover all the national laboratory demands and margin for unseen maintenance. However, this month, NASA told GAO that in spite of decreasing the anticipated flights to 51, NASA is no longer projecting a cargo shortfall. What changes have occurred to cause you to reduce the number of flights without having any impact on estimated needs for cargo?
What's occurred is the failure rate of the onboard spares and equipment on board space station has been less than what we originally predicted. We're seeing the hardware is performing better than we thought. It's lasting longer without maintenance and need for repair, so that gives us some of the margin that you described. We still have not taken fully into account what we actually observed for those failure rates. We still are biasing it more towards a conservative side. So we think there may be even some more margin if the hardware performs even as good as it's been performing in the past several years.
Ms. Chaplain, are you satisfied with NASA's justification, and what information would you need to make sure they've conducted sound analysis?
Yes, what was being said about the spares lasting longer does agree with what we were finding in our latest research. We had also heard that the space station was using fewer supplies now than before. They must have found ways to use things more effectively. We'd probably like to see more information along those lines, and we haven't analyzed the latest data in great detail, so those are the kinds of things we'd probably want to see behind it.
Mr. Gerstenmaier, Ms. Chaplain in her testimony cited crew availability as a major constraint on the productivity of the ISS National Lab. How does NASA plan to address this constraint, and how significant will it be going forward?
Crew time is clearly a precious commodity on board space station. What we've been trying to do is reduce the amount of activities that the crew needs to do to take care of themselves. In some cases, we've looked at ways that we can do less medical investigations directly on the crews, so there's a little more time available for them. Some of the maintenance activities we've been able to cut back and defer. Some of the testing we do on components we've cut back, and what that's allowing is some more research time for the researchers to use the crews for those research activities. If we get commercial crew at some point, we'd like to increase the number of crew members on the flights from 3 to 4, and that would allow us to have additional crew member on orbit, which would also increase the crew time available for research.
Thank you. Ms. Chaplain, do you care to comment?
Your crew time availability was a concern in our review. That was 2 years ago, so I do recognize that actions have probably been taken to kind of make that time smarter.
Thank you. Kind of changed it a little bit, this talk about the Soyuz. Mr. Gerstenmaier, do the Russians have the industrial capacity to produce additional launch systems after 2016 to satisfy crew transportation demand if commercial crew systems or the space launch system are not ready?
We're going to, they have the industrial capability to manufacture the vehicles. Our typical lead time is roughly 3 years to maybe 2.5 years that we have to make known that we need a vehicle for our purposes. So we will have to order those vehicles in the 2013 timeframe for flights in the later half of 2016 and early 2017.
When would NASA, this is for you again, Mr. Gerstenmaier, when would NASA and the international partners need to decide on extending the life of the ISS?
And by extending the life, you mean beyond 2020?
Yes.
Probably in the 2015 timeframe. We're estimating around December 2015. Again, that's based on us having to procure items about 3 years in advance. So then you could take 2021, subtract 3 years, and that's 2018 or so ordering time, and then it takes us a little bit of time to work through the contracting activities. So we think sometime in 2015 we should be making decisions about whether we're going to extend beyond 2020. And we'd have to do that also internationally, get approval from our international partners, et cetera. So that's a pretty lengthy process, but we would start that activity in 2015.
2015. All right. Well, thank you all. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Yields back. Recognize Ms. Bonamici of Oregon. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank all of you for your testimony today on this important hearing that's focused, I believe, appropriately on the challenges and opportunities of the International Space Station. And I wanted to ask you to discuss some educational issues and the value of the work being done on the ISS for educational purposes. And I recall, for example, Oregonian astronaut Susan Helms, who actually spent 163 days on the ISS and coming into Oregon schools and inspiring hundreds, if not thousands, of students about space and about science, and especially the young girls. So that's just one example, and I wondered if you could please discuss how the ISS is being used currently to inspire and educate young people in science and technology and engineering and mathematics, the STEM disciplines. Do you have specific examples, and also is there potential that is not being met?
One good example is last week we concluded a science fair project with students on board Space Station. We teamed with YouTube, Google, and Space Adventures, and they sponsored a global international competition for students to present science fair projects to be performed in space. The age categories were 13-year-olds through 18-year-olds. We received 9,000 videos throughout the world, the 3-minute videos of science projects that students would like to perform on Space Station. We down-selected out of those to 2 finalists whose experiments will actually fly to Space Station on HTV this summer, and they will be performed by Sonny Williams on board Space Station in the fall. One winner was from Egypt, and 2 girls in the 13, 14-year-old category were from the state of Michigan. It was pretty exciting to see the videos and the creativity the kids put together. The girls from Michigan, they focused on this bacteria and virus discussion I had. They were intrigued by that, so here's a 13-year-old students trying to pick up the state-of-the-art research at the age of 13 and actually propose an extremely wonderful experiment to be done on station. The Egyptian experiment dealt with a spider that jumps to capture its prey. So the question or hypothesis was, would this spider, how would it do in space when it jumps and it floats instead of uses gravity? Would it be able to adapt and learn? So again, the students were pretty inquisitive of how they understood what the microgravity properties were and submitted pretty special investigations. The discussion you had with Susan Helms was the ham radio activities. We still do lots of ham radio activities into schools, and the response from kids is phenomenal.
Thank you. And have you can you identify constraints that might affect, other than budget, of course, that might affect the ISS utilization for STEM education and outreach?
Again, I think crew time becomes a consideration, how much time the crew has available. As you stated, budget is always a constraint for us. We've made available some additional upmass, like we have this summer to carry the students' experiments to space, so there is upmass available in the cargo manifest. So we've tried to accommodate it within our resources to make sure that kids get a chance to virtually participate in the space station and get a chance to see what the astronauts are doing.
Terrific. Thank you. And Ms. Chaplain, in the past, NASA has told the GAO that failures or significant delays in developing the commercial cargo transportation would lead NASA to operate the ISS in a survival mode, including going to a 2-person crew. And under that scenario, the ISS would only conduct minimal science experiments. Is this still the anticipated scenario if the commercial cargo providers are significantly delayed or experiencing a failure?
I believe what's already been said here is very on point, that if you get into have delays that extend beyond 2013 or into 2013 and beyond, you'll see a lot of impacts on the space station and a lot of scaling back of research. Whether it would actually take them to the survival mode is more for Mr. Gerstenmaier to answer.
Mr. Gerstenmaier?
I think ultimately, if we don't get the cargo in the time frame we need, we will have to cut back on research first and then eventually go to the survival mode. But we have diversity in cargo vehicles. We have the HTV, the ATV. We can use some limited upmass on Progress, and then we have the 2 commercial providers. So out of those 5 different entities, we think we have a broad enough variety of cargo providers that we can meet this challenge of utilizing the space station in the future.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
All right. Thank you, lady. Recognize Mr. Hultgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Appreciate your time and the information. A couple questions, just specifically more timeline and plans with NASA. Mr. Gerstenmaier, I wonder if I could address these to you. NASA Authorization Act of 2010 requires that NASA design the multi-purpose crew vehicle, Orion, to provide backup capabilities for cargo and crew transport to the space station in the event commercial or partner-supplied vehicles are unable to do so. Wondering if you could tell me specifically how NASA is doing, what they're doing now to ensure that Orion and multi-purpose crew vehicle will be operational and ready in time to comply with the law.
We're proceeding as fast as we can with both the multi-purpose crew vehicle and the Space Launch System. We have planned a scheduled uncrewed flight in 2017, and then our first crewed flight is in 2021. In 2017 is driven more by the hardware manufacturing ability, and additional funding really doesn't move the 2017 date very much. That is where it sits. We have a pretty exciting test flight coming up here in 2014 that will give us key information on how well the Orion capsule performs. The 2021 date is driven a little bit more by budget. We would have the option of potentially moving that date forward as we refine our budgets to help if we need to try to get it in front of the end of space station. But it looks like with the MPCV and SLS, the earliest we could be potentially there to help out with station would be probably in the 2018 timeframe.
Okay. Following up a little bit, or just refining, I guess, NASA's fiscal year 2013 budget request, I know, just reduced Orion's funding by $200 million. And even though you've stated that these Orion and SLS are top priorities, again, wondering with that 2014 test flight of Orion, I know that's an uncrewed flight that's coming up, but wondered what specific human space flight or life support work is being funded by NASA now to ensure that Orion will in fact be ready to jump in and act as backup to service space station if needed.
We're doing some limited life support development. It's ramped down a little bit. We also have quite a bit of life support equipment that we're actually using on board the space station. It provides CO2 removal and oxygen generation for the crew on board station. That has direct application to the systems that would fly in Orion in the future. So we're doing some work along those lines to keep things moving forward as much as we can. You know, we have to make hard decisions and trade things across our budget. When we look at it, commercial crew has the potential of being there a little bit earlier than we can with the government system. So we're pushing or aiming our direction towards the commercial crew activity to provide that service.
Chairman had talked a little bit earlier of our reliance on the Russians right now, and I wonder what is NASA's plan if a catastrophe, and again we all hope and pray that never happens, but if catastrophe occurs during a returning Soyuz capsule, what is NASA's plan to respond to that, and how would U.S. retrieve remaining astronauts on the station if something were to happen?
At this point, as I stated in my opening remarks, we're dependent totally upon the Russians for crew transportation. We've always been dependent upon the Russians for rescue capability from the space station, so that risk is still there. If we had some event that occurred where the Soyuz was not available for us, we would be in a situation where we'd have to look at decrewing the space station. We would try to accelerate both commercial crew and the Orion, SLS, MPCV systems as much as we could to reestablish a crew presence as soon as we could on orbit from those events.
Okay. And just if you can comment on this, but then open it up to the other witnesses as well. Just wondering if you could talk about what you see as applications of value to the U.S. economy that we might be able to expect to see from the ISS over the next several years.
I think one of the biggest advantages is there's unique properties in microgravity that exemplify themselves in microgravity, such as the bacteria discussion I had with you, materials properties, crystal growth, etc. Our hope is that commercial companies, we can expose to them what these unique properties are, what NASA's research has shown in the past. These commercial companies can see these processes and then decide to try an experiment, take it to space station, and see if they can develop one of these commercial processes that will help them gain an economic advantage globally. So things like vapor deposition, combustion research, fluid motion, all those things, we think if we can expose to the commercial companies what the unique research can be done in space in those areas, we think commercial companies can then exploit that to their economic advantage and gain a competitive advantage over other companies that don't take advantage of space-based research.
Okay. Don't know if any of the other witnesses have any thoughts on economic benefits or benefits for our nation over the next several years from the International Space Station.
I just comment that the nonprofit organization set up for the station, it's one of their goals to bring in commercial companies into the research and increase that, and that could be beneficial. And I do recall earlier hearings here a few years ago where you had some commercial representatives talking about how they would count on the station more and more if they could get research up there, and they thought it would be beneficial to the economy.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I yield back, Chairman.
Gentlemen, I yield back. Ms. Edwards of Maryland, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Gerstenmaier, I want to actually focus on an issue related to the 2013 budget request for ISS. It appears that NASA plans the plans for utilization and research of the ISS funding in the out years will depend on part on assumed reductions in operations and maintenance for the ISS. It looks as though those NASA projects will drop more than $4 million in O&M costs over the 5-year 2013 budget horizon. Is that correct?
I'd have to look specifically at the budget numbers that you're looking at, but I think that general trend is there, and it's caused by when we retired the shuttle program, we had to redesign a lot of our spares and components. That shows up in the maintenance and operations budget. Once that redesign is complete, then that budget is no longer needed. Those spares are designed and they're ready to go fly.
Is that at all dependent also on the projected meeting of milestones in the commercial cargo area?
That reduction is separate. This is development of the hardware that those vehicles would carry. The commercial cargo providers carry that cargo to orbit, so the actual ability to get the cargo and spares to orbit will be dependent upon the providers, but the budget reduction comes from the fact that we're no longer doing non-recurring engineering or redesigning components again here on the ground.
Okay, so let me just ask you, and we've focused a lot in other hearings about the commercial cargo crew and all of that, but I look over the next several months, actually, and there are a number of milestones that have to be met by the commercial providers. What will be the impact on the ISS if those milestones aren't met? One coming up, I think, April 30th, right?
That's correct. The SpaceX demonstration flight would be on April 30th. We have margin on orbit in terms of spares and consumables and research, along with our ATV and HTV flights that are flying, and to last essentially about a year. So we can stay in the current configuration doing the number of research investigations I described earlier for roughly about a year. Then beyond that, we're going to have to take some action to things if these providers have not delivered any cargo during that period. So we've been assuming that we'll get maybe 1 or 2 commercial cargo flights this year. The demonstration flights carry a reduced amount of cargo, but they will also help. Even the demonstration flights will. So if those are successful, we'll be able to push that date out further and continue with normal operations. So we need something to occur within about the next year.
So let me just ask this then, because I think that it's important to assure the committee. What's your confidence level in the commercial providers being able to meet those milestones, including the important one in September of this year?
Again, I think within a year time frame, we will see the cargo providers start to make their first flights, and then there'll be some ramp up time required for them to get operational and get into a pace, a cadence of regular flights. And we've allocated some margin to go do that. It's not a large margin, but I think it's a reasonable plan to get that done.
So do you have a high level of confidence that they're going to meet those milestones this year?
They will meet the minimum milestones that I just described to you.
Let me just ask you about the reliability of the Soyuz, because we've already seen, at least some problems that cause delay. There's another launch that's planned for May 15th. Is that on target? Yeah. And if it's not, what would that mean then to continued on-schedule operations and crew operations on the ISS?
That launch is on target. It is on schedule for the May 15th timeframe. The Russians have talked to us about building another vehicle, both a cargo vehicle on their side, a Progress vehicle, and also a Soyuz vehicle, and having it in reserve. So if a problem comes up, they would have another vehicle essentially ready to go fly in its stead if something occurred. And the problem you described was in manufacturing of a Soyuz vehicle that was getting ready to go fly.
And so presuming that we meet that May 15th target for crew operations, we're fine. But if we don't meet the May 15th, what would be the impact on ISS operations and research?
Again, we probably have several weeks margin to that date, and we would end up having to return the crew and the Soyuz vehicle at roughly the 180-day, 200-day on-orbit limit. When we do that, we would drop the crew size from 6 down to 3. And then that would result in a reduction in research when we make that crew size reduction.
Mr. Chairman, I think that my clock started late, so I'm not going to take that whole 5 minutes. It's still on there. But I do have one last question. I'm curious as to, with respect to the resignation of the center's executive director, and particularly some of the very strong language that she used in criticizing both the political and other aspects of standing up the center as a nonprofit, reaching out to agencies and to the private sector to fully utilize the ISS, whether it's really appropriate that this is a role for a nonprofit, and how it is that is going to be stood up so that we get more than 50% capacity in ISS usage for the United States.
It's a cooperative agreement notice we have with the nonprofit. They gave to us a annual performance plan of objectives and milestones that they were to accomplish during this year. I have sent them a letter and asked them to respond to us by today or tomorrow. We'll see on what their plan is to achieve those milestones that we've established with them. Things such as they're supposed to reach out and bring some investigations in. They're supposed to do an evaluation model, et cetera, that sits in there. So we have objective milestones that we've asked them to give us an extra assurance that they can actually meet those in light of the uncertainties and the problems that they've had during startup.
And has the GAO, Ms. Chapman, taken a look at the center and whether it has the capacity and really looked deeply at the criticisms that were leveled on the center's operations and its ability to meet those milestones?
No, we have not been asked to look at the center and how effective it is yet. I would note that the organizations that operate research for the other labs that we visited, they are a bit different than this one. They tend to be consortiums of universities or contractors, so it's a little different situation, probably worth looking at. Maybe,
Mr. Chairman, as I yield, it would be a great idea for us to request a look at the center's operations, because for me, the resignation of the executive director and the problems that she highlighted are really troubling. With respect to trying to figure out a way that we make the maximum use of the space station and its research capacity. Thank you, and I yield.
I agree with you, but what do you mean, take a look?
I mean, perhaps we could ask for a GAO to review the center, the nonprofit, the relationship that it has, and the agreement with NASA, and whether it's appropriate and prepared to meet the goals that have been set out, so that we get more than 50% utilization capacity in the ISS.
Yeah, I want somebody to go, don't you, to our station?
Yeah, I do. I want someone to go, and I want experiments there, and I want more than 50% of those.
I went out to the West Coast with Mr. Rohrbacher, walked through SpaceX's place. I was impressed. I found a young man there with an impressive operation and high hopes. I came here in 80, and I think it seemed like 82 or 83, something like that. Orbital was here, a company with deep pockets and history of success. And now we have one going to get ready by September 2012 or late April of 2012, to be continued, I guess. And we hopeful, very hopeful that somebody's going to get to our space station, and I know you are, aren't you? Do you have any penalties or anything for failure of going past those times, or you have some expectation of that?
As I described earlier, I talked about...
One doesn't have a launch in place, and the other does. I don't know what that adds into it.
We have the ability to, the contract we have with them is an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract, so we could potentially add additional flights to one that's successful if one is achieving and making more milestones and has the ability to deliver earlier than the other.
Recognize Mr. Rohrabacher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that last suggestion that the committee received, that we asked for a GAO report on this, I think it's a request that we could all support and would be supportive of your leadership in that, Mr. Chairman. First, perhaps the most important question in my mind right now, Mr. Gerstenmaier, is what happened to the Spider?
We will find out this fall.
All right. About the same time we find out about whether or not the commercial space crew is working or not. There has to be a relationship there somewhere. Let's see. So let me ask you this. In terms of if we were not trying to go down the commercial path at all, if they were just trying, if that had never, this commercial alternative had not been for us, would it, as compared to if it is successful, how much would it cost more for NASA to do this in its just within NASA and the Orion, etc., or would it cost less if we would have not gone the commercial route because of duplication that the chairman has mentioned?
For commercial cargo,
yes,
we're able to bring on the two commercial providers, and so far, I think it's been discussed, we spent about $1.6, $1.8 billion on that. That's significantly less than we would have spent on a typical NASA full-up development of that activity. So we have the potential to really get this cargo capability at a dramatically less cost than we would have paid under our traditional contracting.
Yeah, even with a factor of when you have competition, that means there are two different groups going, and you're having to finance both. But even that, when you have competition in play, and you have private sector cost savings in mind, that still gives us. It was still, if it works, and that's a big if it does work, that still means it would be, it was the right decision financially to go in that direction if it works. Okay, because there's a lot of, Mr. Chairman, there's a great concern that we have more than one company involved, and I understand that, and just at first glance, it would look like that's duplicative, and thus it's a waste of money. In the private sector, we have this all the time, where you have competition with different companies, and it ends up, in the long run, if successful, cost-effective for the taxpayer. And that would be the same way, perhaps, with airplane development, et cetera, et cetera. Let me ask this. Later on this year, we're going to find out whether or not the commercial end of this strategy, in terms of the commercial strategy of cargo, is actually meeting its goal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then the crew would be 5 years from now. We will find that out. Is that correct?
Yes. Our current projections are 2017 for crew.
Okay, so if we will know would we know within 2 years whether or not the crew, the progress towards actually fulfilling the contract and meeting the deadline for crew Will we know that within 2 years, whether they are on track?
Yes, we're about ready to issue a Space Act or award a Space Act. We received proposals for a commercial crew integration capabilities activity that will kick off with awards potentially in July and run for a 21-month period. So by the end of that, we expect to have the designs at the critical design level, and we should know then how well they're making, whether they're making good progress or not in the crew activity.
Because we need a 3-year notice to give the Russians in order for them to build a vehicle that will make up if the commercials fail. So we will be watching with you, and we would appreciate you keeping us informed as to the minute as these things progress. One last thought while I have 11 seconds left, or maybe I'm already over, I'm not sure, but just a note, I noticed that the European Space Agency, the director of the European Space Agency, was talking to the Chinese about the possibility of using the Chinese spacecraft and permitting it to dock at the ISS. Mr. Chairman, I'll wait till it's done there. Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to state my strong opposition to any cooperation with the Chinese dealing with the International Space Station. We should not be permitting their rockets to dock. We should not be depending on them. We should not be in cooperation with them. Their rockets, after all, are the product of the greatest theft of technology in the history of mankind, and they are a belligerent power to the safety and security and prosperity of the people of the United States. So I just want to make sure that's on the record, and I would hope that our folks at NASA would deeply consider that at a time when I know they're being pressured to try to cooperate with the world's worst human rights abuser, and that's China. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I'll mark that down. Rohrabacher 1, China nothing. All right, I believe everyone has had opportunity, but I would open it for 2 minutes to anybody else that wanted to make a statement or had some follow-up statement here. There's just 1, 2, 3 of you left. Mrs. Johnson, I recognize you for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope it won't take 2 minutes, but I would like to request that both the NASA's letters to CASAS and their response be given to the committee for the record. Thank you.
Jay and the lady yields back to you. Ms. Edwards, do either of y'all have questions? Okay. I may take a couple of minutes here to ask Mr. Gerstenmaier, what's the current state of negotiations with the European Space Agency for future automated transfer vehicle, or ATV, missions beyond the 3 remaining, and does NASA assume any of ATVs that they're going to be available beyond 2014?
In our latest assessment, we don't plan on using ATV vehicles beyond 2014. What we've been able to do is we found a more efficient way to use propellant on board the space station. We were able to feather the solar arrays during drag periods. It reduces the propellant usage. We're also able to do maneuvers now with space station that require no propellant usage. When we do the maneuvers, we use the control moment gyros to make those maneuvers. So that's allowed us to essentially fill up the propellant tanks on board space station. So at this point, the unique capability of the automated transfer vehicle to carry propellant is not needed. It also, the vehicle doesn't have any capability to carry external cargo, which is important to us. So when we project forward and we look at it, the ATV provides us really no unique capability beyond what we can get from commercial providers. So we would like to provide that capability through commercial providers in the beyond 2015 timeframe. We've not had any formal discussions with the Europeans. We've talked to them conceptually about what we just described to you. We need to also work that with the Russians because we're required to provide propellant to them. We'll work that out internationally over the next year or so. We plan to have probably an agreement with the Europeans maybe at the end of this year.
What's the current state of negotiations with the Japanese Space Agency for future HTV or missions beyond the 5 remaining? And does NASA assume any HTV's capabilities will be available beyond 2016?
Again,
for the record.
When we looked at HTV, it provides you a unique capability. It can carry external cargo, which is important to us. It also can carry batteries for us, which need to be replaced on board space station. It's a much more effective vehicle to carry those than any of our other providers. It also has a large hatch where you can actually carry full research racks across the space station. So HTV has a lot of unique capabilities. We would like to have potentially approximately 4 HTVs from the Japanese in that period beyond 2015. Again, we have not had those discussions with the Japanese. We've told them that we would like to have their vehicle and to continue to use it. We'll have those discussions probably in the next year, but we would be looking for somewhere on the order of 3 to 4 HTVs to fill out that time frame between 2015 and 2020.
Well, thank you. And Ms. Chaplain or General Stafford, do either of you have any concerns or statements about these statements or assumptions?
Well,
I
Mr.
recognize
Chairman,
either of you. General?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a positive move that Mr. Gerstenmaier described as far as starting talks with the Japanese for the HTV because of the large volume it can carry and the payload it can carry up there, because if we're only dependent upon commercial and we have issues there, that the HTV could certainly fill that in and help us there, that could then, result in adequate research.
Right, I think. Ms. Chaplain, do you have any suggestions there to close? You get the ladies always get the last.
The last word. I like
summation.
I like having the last word. I think it's great if we could get more of them. The questions for me would be with the production lines, and can they be sustained that long? Are we going to face issues like obsolescence, things like that you typically face? But the longer you can keep something that works going, the better in this case.
All right, I thank you, and I thank the witnesses for their very valuable testimony, and the members for their questions. Members of the committee will have some additional questions for you. If we do, we'll respond to you in writing and ask you to respond back to us in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks, and additional comments from members. And the witnesses are first thanked very much for your time it took to get you here, and the time to prepare, and the time you've given us, and the time it'll take you to get back to your workstation. Witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.